You are attending the very first lecture, so thank you so much, everyone. This is digital access and digital literacy. And I'd like to first acknowledge that the AMSSA offices and my personal location at the moment are on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And the Musqueam are the traditional Hunkaminam speaking people. And I would just like to acknowledge and thank them for all of their hardships and teachings and the things that I'm learning. And thank you to Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada for sponsoring this event. I'd like to let you know that this lecture is being recorded and it will be posted in post-production, after post-production on the AMSSA website. And we are also going to be saving the chat and all the messages in the chat. So just wanted to let everyone know about that. And if you have any technical difficulties throughout the event, Alice Podell is supporting on the tech pieces, so please don't be shy to email her at apodel, P-O-U-D-E-L, @amsa.org. And on a tech note, if everyone could please mute their microphones, that would be wonderful, or if our moderator could mute all, thank you. So in terms of our agenda for this first, So our agenda for this first lecture of the series, we are going to hear from our guests on digital access and its correlation with digital equity. So how are those two things related? And they're going to share some research that they've done with you on a study that is inventive pedagogies and social solidarity in COVID-19. So this is going to be a great opportunity for you to hear about the research that's been done and some of the interviews they've done. We'll also hear from a special guest. We'll do a first breakout and give you some opportunity to engage with some of that content. And then we'll take a 10-minute break and then move into the second section, shifting power and pedagogies of solidarity and post-pandemic possible futures. So here moving into what are some of the solutions and the pieces that are required for moving forward. And you will again be able to generate and share some of those pieces. We'll do a final Q&A with our guests today. So please do not be shy, send in your Q&A or your questions as we go along, just so you don't forget them. You can type your questions into the Zoom chat box at any time, and we'll be monitoring those to then share them with our presenters later. And for the breakout rooms, if this is new for you, you will be assigned a breakout room, and all you have to do is click the button that says Join Breakout Room when that happens. And could I ask everyone to please rename themselves? You can rename yourself in Zoom to include your full name and organization by clicking on the Participants tab at the bottom, or the menu bar that has a participants icon. And then you can, beside your name, right-click on the rename button. And in here, you should be able to type your full name and comma organization, or you might want to type your role. This is very helpful for you to understand each other's roles as we move through this conversation, or some of the breakout conversations in the lecture, in the breakout rooms. So next, I would like to introduce our guests. We have 3 guests joining us for this first lecture. We have Suzanne Smythe, the Associate Professor in Adult Literacies and Adult Education at Simon Fraser University. Her current research program is examining how digital access and new technologies are changing pedagogies and theories as usual in community, language, and literacy settings. So again, you will be hearing and privy to some of this work that she's doing. And we also have Amea Wilbur joining us. Amea is the Assistant Professor in the Department of Adult Education at the University of the Fraser Valley, and she's a co-researcher on this COVID and adult education project with Suzanne. Amea has worked in the settlement sector for many years in Vancouver, and she has facilitated numerous workshops on trauma-informed practice for settlement and language providers, both provincially and nationally. They are going to also be introducing you to Marcella Mancia-Fuller, who's joining us today, who's a Link and Settlement Services Coordinator at Collingwood Neighbourhood House, but a little bit more on Marcella later. So I'm going to now pass it over to Suzanne and Amea, who are going to jump into the work that they've been doing to discover more about these pedagogies, inventive pedagogies and social solidarity.
Great, thanks, Julie. I just want to first of all acknowledge that we had another co-researcher, Emily Hunter. She wasn't able to join us, but she was a big part of the study and helped with all of the interviews that we did. So I'm just going to move my, just move up to where we left off here. So I apologize for this, but and I'm also very pleased to see a number of our interviewees at the session today. So that's nice to see some faces. I'm sure they'll add to what they've already said when they joined us. So today we're going to be looking at digital inequality in Canada, and our study was called Inventive Pedagogies. Sorry, I'm just going to move my little box here, and social solidarity in COVID. We'll talk a little bit about our methods and findings, and then we're going to ask you to break into, well, Marcella Fuller will be joining us and talking a little bit about the interviews that we did with her. And then we'll be asking you to break out into two separate small group discussions. So we'll have one group discussion, come back, and then have another group discussion. So we look forward to hearing from you, and we'll have some time for questions and future directions at the end. So I'm just going to pass it over now to Suzanne, who's going to, she's going to be talking to you a little bit about digital inequality.
Thanks, Amea, and hello, everybody. It's really exciting to be here. I see so many faces. So when we began this research, looking at pandemic pedagogies, if you like, during the lockdown, one of the impetus, or one of the moments of urgency among all the other, very urgent things that were happening, was this sense of people just being completely cut off almost overnight from their usual social and information networks, their connections to their schools, their community-based learning, their linked classes, and so on. So we really, we thought it would be really important to look at what these digital access and digital inequality issues, how these were playing out in the moments of the lockdown and what groups were doing about it. So the digital, just to kind of talk about digital inequality, some of the research that's done around this looks at it from the perspective of equity and justice. And what we mean by that is that digital inequality is not just a divide where either you have internet or you don't, or you have an access to a device or you don't, but rather that digital equity or digital justice looks at who has access to these resources, and what are the quality and what are the connectivity issues that shape people's access. So for example, we can say, well, if everyone has a cell phone and they can get onto public Wi-Fi, then they have internet access. But really, there's a lot of inequalities in between those modes of access, because is a cell phone an appropriate tool to use for example, taking a test or participating in a linked class? Is reliance on public Wi-Fi that is not secure and that's often quite slow the same thing as a high-speed home internet access that higher income communities might have? So we really do look at those detailed or kind of personal experiences of connectivity, but also how they connect across different race, gender, class, and linguistic groups. And Amea, do you want to just go to the next? So for example, we know that in Canada, although we're told that 95% of Canadians have access to internet in their homes, it's that access is not, it's not all secure, it's not all high speed, it's not reliable, and it's not necessarily through a modem. It can be through a cell phone. So the ways that they've decided to define digital access in Canada is very broad, and it doesn't get at these issues of connectivity that I'm sure a lot of you have noticed really matter for the quality of learning experiences and so on. Next. So just very briefly, we can see why digital inequality was a problem in the lockdown. Only 64% of Canadians who earn less than $31,000 a year have internet connection at home. So we can say that there's an average of 89 across the country, but it's very polarized. We can also see that the percentage or proportion of income that lower income households pay for internet is almost nine times that of a higher income household. We can also see that only 63.4% of people who earn under 31,000 have their own home computers, and that only 73% own mobile phones. So that's just a bit of a context in terms of what you might have been experiencing yourselves during the lockdown about why digital access was such an issue in Canada. Next slide. So very briefly, and we're going to be getting to this later, I won't go into it, but one of the ways that we theorized or talked about digital inequality in a study was to look at how gender, location, income, ethnicity, language, immigration status, employment status, and education and literacy background, these all work together or they intersect to kind of shape people's experiences with digital access during the lockdown. And I think we can all think of a lot of examples about that, of how that the complexity of it, but also how important it is to think intersectionally through these different equity issues. Next slide. Amy, I'll turn it over to you now to just maybe talk a bit about our study.
Sure. And before I move on, I just want to say both Suzanne and I are adult educators, so this is not going to be a traditional lecture in the same way. We are going to put you into groups and have you do some discussion amongst yourselves. So I'll talk a little bit about the goals and some of the scope and the methods of our study. So we framed our goals into kind of three general questions in terms of guiding our study. The first one was to document the work educators, advocates are doing to support low-income and newcomer communities with whom they work. The second one was to understand how these educators and communities are responding through invention or resurgence of novel pedagogies and strategies. And then the last one was building on these to inform, strengthen adult education work post-pandemic. So what collective actions in terms of policy and practices are being taken or can be taken to support adult education and outreach work post-pandemic. So we kind of wondered, would the dynamic and inventions which community-based educators were engaging gesture towards more equitable, inclusive, social, racial, gender, technology futures, both within settlement sector and outreach sector and beyond? So we look, this was kind of framing our big questions when we were moving forward. So we used qualitative interviews, qualitative conversations. So we invited people to connect with us, and actually that wasn't very hard. We noticed how much people wanted to actually talk about some of these things, and we set these up at a time that worked for people, and I will say that both Suzanne and I were overwhelmed with the response. And so together we had 24 conversations in May and June. 17 of these were worked in immigration settlement sector. So like many of you do, 8 were teachers in the LINK program, 7 outreach workers to newcomer families, 4 were administrators and program managers. And then the last 7 were adult educators in basic education, teaching in Indigenous communities, and drop-in technology programs and literacy programs for women and seniors. And also we interview people across the country. Most of our interviews took place in BC, but we did have people in rural communities and in larger cities in other provinces as well. So now it's back over to you, Suzanne.
Yeah, so we thought I guess we started with these broad questions, and then we really got down to asking who's doing the work and what are they doing? And I should say that as we were listening to the interviews, we were also reading the experiences coming out from other countries and jurisdictions. There were a lot of webinars and a lot of activity going on to look at how people were pivoting very quickly to meet the digital and linguistic and literacy needs of communities that were already doing a lot of the frontline work, already very vulnerable in terms of the effects of COVID, socioeconomically as well as health-wise. So we were really reading these interviews with the policies together. And then I want to go to the next slide, Amea. One thing that became really clear from the very beginning, and many people said exactly what this informant told us, is that government services, municipal services, and universities retreated from communities while others such as nonprofits and community-based groups moved forward. And there was a great irony in this, but it was really visible in our research, as well as in kind of the other kinds of work we were doing, that it had to do with harm, it had to do with risk, policies, legal and otherwise. But what actually happened was those organizations that had, I guess you could say, that were mostly grant funded, had the least resources to begin with, I guess, in terms of infrastructure, were those that tended to be going into the communities and finding solutions. Municipal and government services actually retreated, as some of them haven't even, at this point, started back up again. And I think that's really important to remember, is who's doing this work. Next slide, Amea. So this is just a table, and it actually comes out of a paper that we wrote that will be available very soon if anyone's interested in reading it. That just kind of summarizes and looks at our interviews and our findings. But these are the different pedagogies and actions that these community-based workers, outreach workers, settlement workers, literacy educators were engaging in. And I'd like to encourage you to look at these pedagogies through a literacy and digital equity lens. So addressing fear about COVID was one of the primary pedagogies people were engaging in. And we can imagine that this has to do with digital access and the fact that most of the COVID advice and information was through internet and maybe cable TV, but also through monolingual English health jargon. And so a lot of the community-based educators, their work was very much about finding inventive ways to share information about COVID that families and that community members could access. Food insecurity and fear of losing housing was another really imperative pedagogy at the time. From GoFundMe pages to advocacy work with government agencies. And I think Marcella will talk a bit about some of the work that they were doing just to help people figure out the CERB forms, and also to help government agencies figure out how to make their online forms accessible. So I think actually there was a lot of work done, really important work done, to make bureaucracy more accessible to people, and we hope that that continues into the future. I won't go through all of these, but one of the important ones, sustaining learning communities, is a lot of what we'll talk about today, and maybe in your small groups, is just how to get people reconnected to language programs, get onto Zoom, Microsoft Teams, a lot of co-teaching, a lot of sharing of tech, a lot of sourcing of free tech. And I think that work was incredibly important, meeting up in parks, a lot of social distancing improvisations, but also really importantly here, realizing that it was those who were least connected that were having the most trouble getting access to their linked classes. And if we think about that intersectionality, those with the lowest literacy skills, those without home internet, those with only maybe one device for the whole family, those with low literacy skills and digital literacy skills were those that had a really hard time reconnecting. Next slide. So yeah, these are just more of the pedagogies addressing mental health and traumatic effects of physical distancing. We know now that there's been, we know a lot more about the mental health effects of lockdown, the re-traumatizing and traumatizing effects of that for people, especially from refugee backgrounds who have recently arrived. This was a very traumatizing experience. And what we were really interested in, and what really came to the fore, was that it was in many ways the old technologies that were the most important and powerful for reconnecting people. And those were creating customized learning packages, making coloring books, printing off materials, dropping it off in people's doorsteps, meeting in parking lots. Phone call check-ins were absolutely imperative. Just that human-to-human connection. How are you doing? And again, mostly the low-tech strategies were the most highly effective. And I think one of the things that came out, and again, from the intersectional lenses, is that gender-based violence and isolation really came to the fore, in addition to food security. And those two issues became one of the key ways that outreach workers and settlement workers and literacy educators were figuring out very quickly inclusive ways to do their work, using a diversity of literacy and language strategies. I think next slide. So this is just excerpts from some of our interviews, that the most common barriers for women to participate in online learning were computer literacy and access, long wait lists due to fewer classes, lack of adequate devices for online learning, lack of adequate physical space to learn in their homes, quiet space to focus since their families all around, and so on. So that was certainly a challenge. But we also learned that as people began to source donated cell phones just for that one-to-one connection, who ended up with the cell phone most often in the family was often not women. It also created a challenge for the outreach workers, because they really wanted to check on the well-being of women in their families. But because you can see call histories, that often introduced some issues of safety. So again, very inventive strategies to find ways to connect with women face-to-face and one-to-one. So what we're really seeing is tech helped us in many ways. Tech helped the sector to get their courses and programs online. And I'm sure we'll talk about more about that. But sometimes it was the low-tech human interpersonal connections and the new ways of doing that work that were the most powerful. So I think at this point, Marcella, this might be a really good place for you to come in and just talk a little bit more about what that work looked like in your organization.
Thank you, Suzanne. Hello, everybody. First of all, well, thank you for inviting me, and also it's really it was a great privilege to be part of this research. And I just would like to share my experiences that by no means reflects the whole sector, right? This is just one experience. And also, you might find some commonalities with some of the work that some of you are doing. One of the things that we learned very quickly was that to change our services from that human connection into the digital online connection was really challenging from the perspective of also looking at who we have in frontline, right? What kind of capacities we had there, and what we had to implement or support for the whole army of frontline people to continue supporting the community through this process. That was one of the things that we learned very quickly. I remember there was the lockdown Monday, and then Tuesday, we had to start to provide these online services right away. No time for planning or any of the capacities that we needed to build before we went into that. So that we learned it so quickly, but as well it was the whole understanding that we were one of the essential services. I work in the settlement sector, and then link programs, youth programs, community connections programs, one-on-one services, childcare. So for us, what it was really important at that moment, it was to support internally our staff on how they were going to move forward and what they needed from us that were behind. I'm not a frontline person, I'm more in the side of administration. However, one of the things that we saw immediately was the huge responsibility that frontline people were carrying on, since they were the ones that had the direct relationship with the community. That was a huge emotional and professional load on the workers. From that experience, we start to connect even closer in my organization, closer to the frontline people, and identifying exactly what kind of support they needed, way beyond of just the computer, way beyond of a cell phone or connection to internet. What they actually needed in terms of sustaining, learning, and having the opportunity to continue developing those relationships with the people that we were serving. So that was for us such a great, huge amount of work to work together. And everything changed in our relationships. Now, suddenly we are connected every single day. This is incredible, but because when we were in person, I think internally in the organization, we are all busy. But when this happened, I feel that our relationship with the frontline people became closer. Now was the time to see what was needed. One of the things that we start to do was to increase capacity in terms of using technology. There were a lot of fears, but also it was to connect with the people that we serve, such as students, link students. We did a little bit of a survey with the students in terms of what was their accessibility in terms of technology. And some of the findings that Amea and Suzanne already mentioned, it was one of the things that, okay, well, we have family, we don't have access to technology, we don't have technology in terms of as a family, right? I might have my cell phone. I can't take a class through the cell phone. So once we got the results and understood the challenges that people that we were serving were facing, came to the internal planning. And according to the resources that we had, we started to provide, to develop that kind of a plan together with the frontline people, teachers, settlement workers, childcare workers, youth workers, any community workers that were available. So that was for us a huge learning, but also it was great conversations or huge conversations internally in terms of where are we getting these resources? How we are going to support the community in terms of technology, in terms of staff hours, because now another thing that we face, we're not spending the same amount of time when we were providing services face to face. Now we are, first of all, the emotional piece that we needed to sustain for people that we were serving. Then how we are going to find out exactly what is the emergency right now, or the most important service that need to be provided. Then how we are going to support that. So there were different layers that we were learning. And by building capacity and providing the right resources, or at least the most important resources at that moment to staff and everybody that was working together to deliver services, we start to build capacities little by little. Just, I would want to give one example that internally at Collingwood Neighborhood House, we were able to secure a full-time position for a person that was developing tutorials on how to access Zoom from different devices, tutorials for staff. This is another thing as well that I want just to mention. This highlighted that a huge number or percentage, and I don't want to dare to say a number, but it's a huge one, that frontline people that are serving the community, they're immigrants themselves. They also people that have learned a lot of, they have a variety of languages, skills, but as well, there was this situation of now, it's a huge shift and learning at the same time that they need to be serving the community. So that was one of the amazing things I have to say, and very inspiring to see the how people that are also in the very precarious situations in terms of change, in terms of learning, but they also providing this support to the community. And for me, that was a huge learning in terms of also highlighting all those capacities that are so much just embedded in our employment, that we are not able to bring those capacities to the outside and recognizing how this sector, and I just want to focus in the settlement sector where I work, but also is that I'm sure so many sectors that continue also facing identifying all those resources and skills, capacities that people that are serving the community were crucial through this process, continue being crucial in this process, where now with the second wave of benefits, right? That now is like another shift, another way of, we need to learn quickly, because now we need to sustain the community. We need to continue moving forward. So with all these things, I think that the capacities that we are building, this is just in terms of a frontline staff, but also how we are building capacities in the community by providing a little bit, because it's just a very tiny bit. Perhaps the technology support, digital training, and also we need to sit back a little bit, and it's like the pace of our work need to be slower. So all these things is been really a huge learning for us, and I'm sure a lot of you have gone through so many ways of supporting the community and moving forward. So I wanted just to share this, because this is very important in terms of how we continue sustaining the community and how we need to continue building capacities. And I hope later on we're going to talk a little bit more about the practices that we have developed, and I'm sure a lot of you, I would like to really hear it from the breakout groups, because this is just only one grain, right, of this, but also together to start to think how we're going to move forward with all these findings. Who needs to be at the table? That's all that I want to say.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to move on to, these were the questions we asked Marcella to respond to, and now we're going to move on to the small group discussions. So we've got the questions here, and Julie, maybe I should hand it over to you because you'll be putting people into the groups.
Sure. We have Nagin who's helping us put people into breakout rooms, but I will let everyone know that we will, after the 15 minutes approximately breakout session, we would like to capture some of the things that you are sharing with each other. And so we would like it if you could nominate someone within your breakout room to put 2 or 3 points that summarize your discussion, or points that answer the question, which you can see on the screen here now, in the chat on behalf of your group, so that we can see those later and we can share them out again even after with everyone. So if everyone in each, or if you in each breakout group could nominate someone to record 2 or 3 of your main ideas, that'd be great. So I made a post in the chat. Hi everyone, please begin to input some of your discussion points into the chat. And I'm seeing a few of these points here. So I can read some of these out, and then maybe Amea and Suzanne, I'll pass it back to you, and you can also solicit more comments orally if you'd like. But I see group 5, thank you. They are posting that they spend a lot more time with each client than before in order to help them learn technology. And that iPads were secured for a cohort of 24. That's amazing. In my group, on this vein, there was a final comment about how creative everyone has become in this process to make it work, because you cannot provide service if there isn't the technology. And so there's been a lot of creativity, and that monies were found. And that was a comment from my group. Also here, there was an iPad in group 15. They're referring to an iPad lending program that comes with a data card to lend out to those who don't have access. And many clients used the library for tech access, but that's no longer available. Yeah, children when people are working from home or learning from home, it's often difficult when childcare supports are needed. This is great. Thank you everybody for putting your comments and summary into the chat. Group number 2 said that not everyone had access to the internet. So in the beginning, it took much more work on the telephone to explain how to connect online. And they noticed that clients are much more comfortable and enjoying their online experience, maybe now than they were before. They had to teach how to take screenshots and how to take pictures and send them to the settlement team so they can help with insurance and online banking, etc. That came up in our group as well. This is great. So many comments are coming in. So Amea, Suzanne, would you like to respond to some of what you're seeing coming up in the chat? There's just a lot, which is fantastic. And I can scan that and we can come back to it in our Q&A as well, perhaps. But any comments from your breakouts?
Yeah, this is so interesting. And I was in a really interesting group as well. And I'm sure Amea will have some comments too. I think that what was happening when we did our interviews, it was right during the lockdown. And so Zoom was very new and people were really enjoying it. And we're going to talk after the break about some of the ways that power relationships and new possibilities for how outreach and settlement groups do their work came up, and that I think are still really relevant. But I think that what's also happening is that the allure or newness of Zoom is wearing off, and that there's some more problematic issues that are starting to settle in, which might make us take, I think that there was some hope or some speculation that online learning might be the way that LINC would go forward, or that settlement work might take more of an online approach. And in many ways, that could be really important for groups for whom leaving the home or going out in the community is really difficult. However, there are issues and questions around security and Canada's reliance on Zoom. It is, a server based in the US, and there are some groups who are political refugees and who are from countries where their countries do engage in online surveillance. So I think that that's a new area for the field to become aware of, is what is the potential and what are the risks for people as they go online, as well as, do learners feel comfortable around learning management systems that are online when they're doing their language classes? Do they know if data is being collected about their learning, and if so, what data and how is it being used? So kind of the data privacy issues. So yeah.
Yeah, we definitely talked about data privacy and how that was a big concern and always has been, but yet it kind of comes back, I think, to what Marcella said about we need tech supports, yes, we need training on how to use them, yes, but we also need a slower pace of work because we still need to keep coming back to what's being taken from us if we sign up for something for free, like a Zoom account, even as a participant, right? And all of those questions, I think there's still a lot of learning that we can do on the privacy front.
I was just going to mention just two quick things before we maybe go to a break. But I think the piece around digital access, and especially access for rural communities, I think is something that came up in the group that I was in, and that importance of that relational approach. So connecting with people and that relationship building, whether it's by phone, by whatever means, but I think those are two things. And I do want to echo the childcare, because I know I'm in the same situation myself, and I'm, I have 2 kids at home and some of the challenges around that. So, yeah. So should we take a break now, Julie? Would that be?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I will share a timer so everyone can see that we're on the same time. And I will start the countdown. All right, so we've got 10 minutes. Please grab a drink of water, stretch, breathe, take a walk, stand up, move around, and we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. All right, so I will pass it back to you, Suzanne and Amea, to continue this first lecture.
I think this was me, Suzanne,
Yeah.
right? So we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the some of the conclusions or findings that we've had come out of the research that we did. So as we can see from the discussion that we had, all of these different approaches are needed to respond to different positioned groups. And again, we can see there's a difference between, say, newly arrived refugee women, and that was one of the groups that we heard a lot about. For those who've been sponsored, who've been more established, who've been here longer, to undocumented workers, to low income seniors is something that came up as well, people in precarious house situations. So all of these pieces, we want to make sure that we respond differently to these. Some of the things that we want to look at is kind of resisting dependency, this idea that, I know we've talked a bit about this, but moving away from clientism and building more of a sense of solidarity between the work that we do as frontline workers, as administrators, and with those we work with, and valuing the education, the perspectives of frontline workers is, I think, a really important piece that came up in our research. And then reimagining literacies and language learning. So we've had maybe looking at moving away from sort of traditional understanding around literacy and language learning
it's
to
like
kind of
very green to it, very military.
to reimagining. Maybe people can mute if they're thank you, to reimagining what these things can look like. And I think we heard some of this from some of the thoughts and ideas that you shared, and I heard some of this even within my group, my small group that I worked with. So these were some of the things that we looked at when we were looking at the research and the things that came up in terms of the research. So I thought these quotes kind of spoke to these ideas, and I'm just going to read them. I'm just going to move my camera. So we can no longer just throw services into the universe and expect people to be happy with the services that you are providing them without even asking them. And this is one of the one of our interviewees shared this, and we kind of thought this was an important piece. People can go now to places they feel comfortable with instead of being directed to a particular organization. And we heard this a lot, is this pandemic's opened up the opportunity to have people feel more power in choosing services that might be more accessible to them, they might respond to better, that they have a bit more openness to looking at other options and not just maybe the one that's closest to them. And this can be difficult in terms of community building, but it can also provide people the opportunity to have more agency in deciding where they see the services fit for them. And then there's an opening for researchers in transformative pedagogies and seeing the learners as part of a community with voice and with agency. And we heard this again and again in the interviews that we did, and the importance of this idea of solidarity and not moving away from clientism or other ways of looking at our work. So we're going to move now back to Marcella, who's going to respond to the question around what new practices, inventive strategies are needed to address digital literacy and digital access, and how can we make programs more accessible and inclusive. So I'm just going to move over to Marcella and pass it over to her.
Oh, thank you, Amea, again. I guess I'm just going to share very quickly. This is not going to take a lot of time in terms of what we have been doing in terms of best practices of developing new practices in the work that we do. One of the things that we have is using technology, social media, the WhatsApp groups, right? That I don't think is unique. I think most of us are using. But this WhatsApp group for us and my team, what is happening is that we check in every day since we are all working online. We check in every day, but we also share the struggles or questions that we have for people that we are serving. And that really allows to have the peer support among our teams in a more intentional way. We tried to do this when we were having our services in person. Unfortunately, there was never enough time, but by doing it in this informal way, we are also building capacities among the teams. And then that also extends into those connections directly with the people that we serve. In a way that they can ask the question immediately, we are able to answer questions. And if they need further support, then we go into different layers starting to serve communities and also identify unique needs in individuals, and not necessarily just, as Amea was saying, okay, this is just the services and it goes here. No, I think it now is going to allow us to identify those needs and respond to that in a more effective way. Another thing that is a practice that we've been implementing is training. Looking into mental health situation for people that we work and how that also their mental health state affects the service that we are providing to people that we're serving in all areas. And training, continue building capacities in terms of training. Another thing that we are trying to do internally is bringing frontline workers into decision making. We are in that process of connecting, and then how we are going to bring frontline people that have all these experiences and knowledge for us to also learn what are the decisions that we need to make together to continue serving the community. And then with that is also bringing the supports with people that we're serving. Okay, now what are the capacities that we need to build there, and how we can integrate also that feedback into the decisions that we're making. We are connecting also with funders in a very open way, without the fear of losing funding or not being able just to meet contracts. I think the funders also start to look into our relationships in a more open, flexible way, and then how we are going to respond together to those needs. This is what I've been observing and experiencing in my role, and also with people that we work. We continue building capacities in terms of digital accessing, not only with us, but as well with the people that we're serving. From the beginning of the pandemic, it was a chaos, just going through that, a lot of learning and fast learning, right? The pace of learning was really, really fast. Now, we are able to identify, for example, if we have students that come and join classes, how we're going to have the person that is going to come and help us to individually train this student in how to access Zoom, how to access their homework, how to upload documents. We're building capacities in a very different fashion. And I just want to leave it like that, because I'm sure the whole sector has a lot to share. But for us, this has been just a huge learning experience and growth, and also looking into the systems that we have that also become oppressive, racist, exclusive systems that now we are going to be able to see from different perspectives as a sector, I hope. Yeah. That's all that I can share now.
Thanks, Marcela. I think we're going to now move into our next breakout room.
Amy, before we do that,
Yeah.
there was a question about how we're defining solidarity, and I thought maybe that would be something to address right now.
Sure. Sorry, I can't see the questions because
No,
I've
that's
got
okay.
the control.
I just
So
thought I would
yeah,
quickly do that now because I think it's an important question before people go back into their groups. And then there was another, I think, question about multimodal access. So solidarity, the way that we're defining it is really, in fact, how Marcella was describing these changing relationships in terms of I guess that over the years, there's been a growing clientism. In other words, we actually read about this. There's some really good articles in Canada that we use in our article to describe this relationship that government agencies often, not always, have with the community-based sector. And it used to be a lot more collaborative. And then for lots of policy reasons and the boondoggle of the early 2000s and so on, a lot of those relationships changed and it's become much more of a contractual relationship. So that, this is what you're going to deliver. Okay, that's what we deliver. And that contractual relationship has slid into relationships between educators and what we call learners, so that more and more often we begin to use the words services and clients. And that language, I think, marks that shift from a more community orientation to the work, from the original history of settlement houses and settlement organizations was that it was about mutuality and social solidarity. In other words, everyone getting together and putting in their resources and helping each other. But over the years, we've slid away from that towards clients and services. And what we were learning in this research was that there was a resurgence of these practices of social solidarity that Marcella has been describing, where people were kind of all coming together and saying, what is it that we can do to support each other? So it wasn't just settlement and outreach workers supporting the community. Community members came up and said, I can translate. I can drop off packages. I can get a WhatsApp group going where we translate as much as we understand from what the CDC is saying about COVID into Spanish or into Chinese. So I think that that's the kind of solidarity that we recognize in our research, and that's what we mean by solidarity.
Thanks for addressing that question, Suzanne. And if you do have more questions, please do put them in the chat and I'll do my best to catch them all. But Suzanne, you're on it, so that's amazing. So are you ready to move into this? Are we ready to move into the breakout number 2 now?
Yes, I'm just gonna launch them in less than a minute.
Okay. So yeah, the question again, what are new practices and inventive strategies? What new practices and inventive strategies are needed to address some of the things that were brought up in your last session and digital access for going forward? How do we make programs more accessible and inclusive? And I like Suzanne's suggestion already in terms of reframing the language that we use. And also Marcella talking about what capacities are needed to build more decision-making power among frontline workers. How could that look in your organization? Maybe that's another thing that you could discuss. So I think we have 10 minutes for this one.
Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna open them up. See you everyone after 10 minutes.
Okay. Wow, that was another great conversation. Thanks to my group. I'm sure there were some other great conversations there. So I will invite everyone to please again share some of the things that you discussed with your group in the chat. If you know your group, you can say which group you were. If not, you can just put in those ideas. And again, you know, what practices and inventive strategies are needed. In our group, I think what came up was that the strategies that are needed are already being integrated, and peer mentorship was brought up, that more peer mentorship could definitely and ways to implement it, as well as changing the language within the conversations to support the idea of peer mentorship and community of practice. That came up for us. Does anyone else want to share? Let's see what we get here.
Maybe Amy and Marcella and I can speak to these as they come in.
Please do.
If that's okay. And then people can also feel free just to ask questions, because we're just running into the last 15 minutes of the session. And this is, I think, a great time to ask questions that you haven't had a chance to ask before. I think, Rhonda, maybe you could say a bit more. Are you saying that the need to collaborate with other classrooms? So rather than having students just with one teacher, they could go to other teachers for other class. I'm not sure if you mean like for different topics.
Well, we were talking about, wouldn't it be great, like meeting everybody from different areas, how great it was doing these breakout rooms. Wouldn't it be great to be able to collectively do this with students and share resources like talented teachers and facilitators? And then you can imagine if somebody wants to do a breakout room and do phys ed for 10 minutes with somebody who teaches yoga or does online fitness. They could go to another group and do a cooking, or they could do another, like people would, because people are saying there is Zoom fatigue. But going forward, if we're looking at different strategies, maybe collectively rather than possessively holding on to access to students and classrooms and things, if we're really truly wanting to share this digital experience, if we're going to have to do this for the next year, wouldn't it be great to be able to give others the opportunity to have access that they wouldn't normally?
Yeah, I mean, that came up a lot in the research, right, Suzanne, is around collaboration between agencies, between organizations. I mean, because of funding, it's often very competitive. And I think, Rhonda, if I'm hearing what you're saying, it's this idea of maybe more collaboration between.
That's what they were saying. Our group was saying, it just seems really amazing being able to do what we're doing today. And just if we're looking at what we're already doing and what could we do better, I think people end up getting better at their skill when they're with other people who are good at what they do. So, you know, even other teachers enjoy hearing a really good teacher. We have some who are doing continuing ed. So they're working and they're taking their masters and they're doing ongoing education. They really get to do their craft better at work because they're watching somebody who does it really well as well. So yeah, just the sharing of resources, it might be a really interesting concept, but of course there was challenges that was discussed that you can't really identify. But the question was, you know, what going forward would you suggest? And that was one that came forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to pick up some of the comment. Oh, Marcella, were you going to say something?
Just I was thinking, because in the past we used to have those conferences with all the teachers in the sector and other sectors too, and now we're lacking that kind of connection, right? But as well, I think that we have never had a conference with all, for example, link students, right? They could come and also share what were their challenges and what were their learnings through this a process, right? It's a practice that we can start to develop as a sector, and thinking it's so exciting to come together and break that isolation of just working in our own little cells more than ever is so isolated. So anyway, that was a great idea what you were saying, Rhonda.
I'm also looking at some of these the amazing things that you're coming out of your groups, and a couple of things really strike me and resonate with the conversations you were having with people in the spring, and maybe we should do follow-up. Yeah, but another 25 people. because it feels like one of the common threads is that there's no one size fits all when it comes to how technologies are being taken up. Each of you are taking up the technologies, and that's a real lesson. What I'm struck by, and what we came up in the first breakout group as well, is some communities use WeChat, some prefer to use WhatsApp, some are on just straight up texting, others are on Facebook, although not many. So again, there's these different communities of practice, and what's really, I think, inventive and really interesting is people are just finding the different ways to connect with their communities. There's also the idea that it can't all be technology based. The face-to-face or the interpersonal connection has to be there. And I think someone was making that point, that we could use, some face-to-face. I do a lot of work with the Burnaby Neighborhood House, and I know that they started an outdoor tent in the summer, and that they are doing one-to-one face-to-face visits for people needing tech support at the neighborhood house again, and they can do that safely. So again, there are ways to use all these different approaches rather than just thinking it has to be, one size fits all. The other point I just wanted to say, and this is about tech sharing, there's a huge push to say, okay, let's be digitally inclusive and let's make sure everyone has tech. But we also have to think of cost, sustainability, and the life of the batteries in terms of the climate. Like, this is really destructive in terms of if we're just going to keep replacing new tech. So I think, I don't know, Sidhu, I didn't get your name, but you were in my group, but you had this fabulous idea, and there were some really great ideas about renting out tech to people. So having tech sign out, but also getting a bit better in our communities around recycling and reusing technology devices, rather than just think that the only solution is to go to TELUS and ask them for new tech.
Yes, it was just basically the idea of individuals who have access to technology and are of the higher income bracket. With our cell phone plans, many of us saying we want the latest and the greatest, and we go out and purchase a new cell phone or we upgrade, whereas our old ones just lie around. So if we had a program for refurbishing old devices or laptops or iPads, what have you, it provide an opportunity for it to be brought back and provided to those who would need them in times of this, in times of crisis, or just for the sake of just having it.
There's a nonprofit in Vancouver that's relevant to this. They're called Free Geek, and you can both drop off old hardware there that you don't need anymore, and you can also get, they basically refurbish and resell it, or I'm not sure exactly their business model, so maybe you could get it for low cost or no cost. I'm not too sure, but that's freegeekvancouver.org. I can put that link in the chat.
I don't know if they're open again yet. They did close down.
I dropped something off just the other week.
Oh, did you? They're back open. I think it's slow, to be honest, to get tech at the volumes we're talking about, but definitely they're an amazing resource. Amea, maybe you wanted, I don't know if you wanted to go over to look at some of the closing statements we had if people don't have more questions, but I did want to say something, and I guess Marcella and Amea, you might have ideas about this too, but the idea that digital literacy is absolutely central to language and education, and we can't see them anymore as separate. So that digital literacy needs to be part of linked classes at all levels, as well as the settlement, obviously the settlement work that people are doing. And the idea that the digital literacies that we use all the time are always changing, and so it can't be it can't be just once and then done. There has to be ongoing digital literacy support as technologies change and so on. But one thing that I was noticing in the chat was just that people are actually really building their skills by practicing a lot and just by doing, and also by learning from each other. So the capacities are there in the communities to do this, but it should not be off the side of the desk.
Right. And Suzanne, I just want to echo that thought that it shouldn't be off the side of the desk. And I think one of the things that came up a lot in both the interviews and even in our small group discussions was this idea that people need more time and expectations need to change, both from organizations, from structures that we have in place. So I think this is something to really consider when we move forward, because all of this stuff takes time. We have a couple of last pieces here, and you can just take a look at them. And I don't know if Marcella, do you want to add anything else?
No, really. Just one thing is that I hope this research also will inform in a way that will allow us to bring forward the needs of in terms of funding and capacities that we still need to continue building in the sector. And I don't know what are the next steps, but it's important that also AMSSA, as umbrella organization, perhaps we can continue these conversations, and as well how we as a sector will be able to work together. You know, these ideas are great, and then practices that we think, how can we move forward, you know, even just little by little. So that's all that I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcella.
Julie, do you have anything you want to add at the end?
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciated all of the pieces that you brought to us. And yes, I do feel that there is a lot that we can work with here at AMSSA, at least in terms of, you know, my role as the language program manager, just going back through a lot of what you all contributed in the chat. And you still have a few moments to put any other ideas in there, but to go through all of those suggestions and ideas of what's already working and pull a lot of the good practices into some of the future convening work that we're doing. For example, we do have some regional meetings that are coming up, and we have a virtual summit coming up next year in January sometime. We have yet to set the date. But these things now more than ever will be able to invite more settlement staff to attend and to contribute and to share and to learn. And one of the ideas for a workshop, I think, could be even best practices for starting up a lending library and things like this. You know, I think so many things that you've all shared are wonderful. It's just a matter of diving into those different pieces and sharing the elements of how they've worked well with each other, because you're already doing so many amazing things out of necessity. So I definitely feel that there's a lot that I can do in carrying forward some of the threads that were brought up today. I just wanted to respond as well to a lot of the comments made in response to the last question. And I know that New Language Solutions is putting together a TESOL Basics for Language Volunteers course, which will also include elements on working with digital aspects of teaching learners. And inevitably, you know, they have to take the course itself online, the volunteers do. So that's in the works, in development. I'm also working on an e-learning course that is going to pull together a lot of basic information and then resources that different organizations have already produced, and you yourselves as teachers and educators have produced to onboard learners to digital literacy platforms, but all in one place. So that is something that we are doing and working on, and I'm hoping to release that within the next couple months. So there's that, and yeah, I just feel like there is a lot that we can do. So on that note, go ahead.
Sorry, just one.
Amea,
The digital, so the BC Coalition for Poverty Reduction, First Nations Tech Council, Mosaic, a lot of groups came together, Downtown Eastside Literacy Roundtable, and started a campaign called Digital Justice for BC, and I put the link there. And it is election time, and we're asking to ensure a $10 a month internet for anyone involved in education, whether it's K-12 or LINC or adult literacy, because we also have a lot of adults excluded from access to education because of digital access. And a lot of those are women, and racialized women in particular. So that's just a little plug.
Oh, great. Thanks for adding that in there. Let's see. Okay, I see it. Thanks, Suzanne. That's fantastic. Okay, so we're nearing the end of our first lecture. So thank you everyone for all your contributions. I'd like to let you know that your feedback is valuable on this first lecture. Nadine, who has put in a lot of effort and done a great job of organizing this event, she will be sending you an evaluation form that if you could take a few minutes to complete, it will help us to create future lectures of this type that meet your needs and provide valuable information. So please stay tuned for that email with the evaluation. I'd also like to say thank you again to our funder, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, for funding this lecture.